Do you believe in God? Do you believe in God is a question that's been leveled at me many times.
Jordan Bernt Peterson is a Canadian clinical psychologist, YouTube personality, author, and a professor emeritus of psychology. The messages he delivers range from hoary self-help empowerment talks to more retrograde and political.
I'm going to, there's some other people on the panel, and I'm going to just review what they said briefly, and then I'm going to talk about what I said, and then I'm going to fix what I said, I hope, so that it's better. At least that's the plan. So Terry Butler, who is a Labor frontbencher, said, I'm agnostic. People are inherently valuable because they are people. And no, that doesn't work out. It's one of those 1 minute answers, except it's actually only 10 seconds. Because you can make the opposite argument, and people do all the time, like the Club of Rome, for example, which was an organization in Rome, logically enough, formed in the 60s, was very much concerned about the terribly detrimental effect that human beings were having on the planet, and I believe it was one of the Club of Rome members who coined the idea, and if it wasn't, it was someone who was thinking exactly the same way, so it works out either way, that human beings were something approximating a cancer on the planet, because of all the terrible things we were doing ecologically and so forth. That was back when people believed we were going to overpopulate the planet to such a degree by the year 2000 that there would be widespread privation and starvation, which, by the way, if you haven't noticed, there isn't. And if you look at the terrible things that people do, apart from the despoiling of the natural environment, let's say, there's all the, malevolence that's associated with human interactions and also human social systems. And it isn't so obvious as a consequence of that you can make a straightforward case that human beings are inherently valuable merely because they're human beings, because you can make an equally logical case from first principles that they're inherently, destructive, or that they should be perhaps limited in their ability to procreate, or that they are a catastrophe for the planet as a whole, or that our entire history is nothing but a sequence of unrequited malevolence, and that people generally can't be trusted. And so I don't find that answer particularly satisfying. I think it's just self-referential. People are inherently valuable because they are people. It's like, you don't really get anywhere with an answer like that. So she's agnostic, but then she has this idea, despite her agnosticism, that you can make the case a priori with nothing buttressing it, that people are somehow inherently valuable. And it seems to me that requires a little more depth and a little more explanation for it to actually be convincing. It's not obvious to me that people themselves think that they're valuable all the time. Often they don't think that at all. They certainly don't think that often when they're depressed. They certainly don't think that when they're suicidal. They don't really think that when they're ashamed or guilty or frustrated or disappointed or angry, or waking up at 3 a.m. and tormenting themselves with their consciences. They don't necessarily think that when they're fighting with their family, or when they're upset at work, or when things go wrong in life. And so it's not so bloody obvious that people are inherently valuable. And then you might also notice that it's kind of easy to think that some people are more valuable than others, sort of like an animal farm, where the animals were all equal, except that some animals were more equal than others. But it's very easy for human beings to think that about other human beings, because no matter where you look in human societies, there are rank orders of value, right? In any hierarchy that we produce that's associated with some ability, we find that some people are so much better at whatever it is that they're doing that it's an absolute miracle, and most people are absolutely dreadful at it. And so, if you were thinking about inherent value as something associated with an approximation of skill or competence, then it wouldn't be obvious from the structure of the world that people were inherently valuable in that manner either, because there's such a rank order difference in our ability to do things. And you might say, well, that kind of averages out across things, but I don't think that's a very strong argument either. So it's bloody well not obvious, I'll tell you. It's not obvious where this idea that people are inherently valuable came from. That's a tough one. And in aristocratic states or tyrannical states, it's certainly not obvious at all that there's any acceptance of the notion that people are inherently valuable. It's like there's no necessary presumption of innocence, for example, and you don't have any sovereign right to your own destiny, like you're not granted the rights, not granted because that's the wrong way of thinking about it, your rights as a sovereign individual who has the responsibility and the capability to determine the destiny of the state itself don't exist. That doesn't exist as a concept, and so I don't see that there's anything there that speaks of inherent value either. So it's by no means an obvious concept. In fact, I think it's one of the least obvious concepts that human beings have ever come up with, that each of us in some strange manner is to be attributed some divine spark, let's say, that makes us equal in some fundamental way before God, before the reality of the universe itself, even in relationship to our own laws. I mean, if you want a miracle for an idea, that's I can't think of one that's more unlikely than that. So I've been puzzling over that for a very long time, because I cannot understand why in the world that idea ever came to be, or how in the world we ever agreed to act as if it was true. It's really something, and we should let that go. We let that idea go to our great peril. It's a fundamental, remarkable, fundamental idea. And what's so interesting about it too is that once you have that idea, weird as it is and improbable as it is, and you start to organize your social relationships in accordance with it, well, then they work. So my rule too is treat yourself as if you're someone responsible for helping, and it's sort of predicated on the idea that regardless of your inadequacies and your malevolence, which I'm sure you have many inadequacies and no shortage of malevolence, just like everyone else. Regardless of that, you have a moral obligation, so that would be a responsibility, to assume that despite all evidence, that there's actually something of intrinsic worth about you, and that as a consequence, you're duty-bound to treat yourself like that is true. And then it turns out that if you do that, well, then your life gets better. And I don't mean happier exactly, although I would say it gets happier. I mean it gets richer and more meaningful and deeper and more worthwhile, and you become more educated and you become wiser, and you treat yourself with more respect, and you're a better model for other people, and you're a better father or a better sister or better mother, whatever it happens to be. And you're less ridden by that guilt that gnaws at you, and shame that's there otherwise saying you're not what you could be, you're not what you could be. And that's a hell of a voice to get rid of, and it's certainly not one that's easy to ignore. So that's a pretty good, that idea that there's something divine, let's say, that resides within you of ultimate worth. Even as a philosophical statement or a psychological statement rather than a metaphysical statement, it seems to be a precondition for establishing properly harmonious relationships with yourself. And that's worth thinking about a lot, that you have, because you could think that in some sense you just own yourself, because people do kind of make that claim, especially when they're trying to justify, for example, their right to suicide, that, it's your life, it's your body, you're yours to do what you will with. And if that was true, well, then it would seem to me that life would be a lot more straightforward, because you would just tell yourself things that you would instantly obey and believe. So first of all, you'd tell yourself all the things that you were going to do, and then you just run off and do them, which you don't, obviously. because it's much more difficult than that. And then you'd also say, well, enough of the guilt and the shame and the negative emotion and the disillusionment and the vengefulness and all those things that make life hard, especially the self-recrimination. It's like, what the hell do we need that for? And if we're our masters of our own destiny and owners of our own fate, then why can't we just command to ourselves that be dispensed with? And like, that doesn't work. I've never seen anybody able to do that. So, I mean, you can fool yourself for very brief periods of time into thinking that might work, but it doesn't work, and that's strange. And this is one of the reasons I love the psychoanalysts, because they were really the people, apart from the religious types, who figured out that whatever you are, you're not a unitary spirit that's under your own dominion. You know, you're something like a loose unity of a multiplicity of spirits, many of which are doing their own thing, which you're striving to bring into some form of unity. But even that unity isn't something that's under your control in any real sense. It's a unity that has its own nature that you have to exist in relationship to. And I would also say that that's one of the things that keeps people's feet firmly on the ground, because otherwise it's easy to become egotistical and narcissistic. You know, if you think that you're the center of your own being, you know, in some fundamental sense, then you're only beholden to yourself. You're sort of a self-created creature. Perhaps you could think about it that way. But it doesn't work like that. It's like the ideal that constitutes the unity that you might become then sort of manifests itself as something that you could strive toward but aren't. And it also serves as a judge. It's the thing that keeps you up at night saying, you know, there's some things you're just not attending to, and you should get at it, because life is short and there's no shortage of trouble that you might end up in, and a wise person would attend to the dictates of his conscience and lay out his actions in the world according to what he knows to be true and correct. And that is how people think. And it isn't obvious that why we think that way. This is part of the reason that it seems to me so obvious that we have a religious instinct, because I can't think of what else you would possibly call that other than a religious instinct. You know, Nietzsche, when he proclaimed the death of God, which by the way was no triumphant proclamation, because he also mentioned that we would never find enough water to wash away the blood, which was his what would you call it, prognostication for the 20th century, and a very accurate one at that. He believed that we would, in some sense, have to become as gods in ourselves in order to replace what we had lost. He thought that the collapse of the Judeo-Christian structure would be absolutely catastrophic for the West, and I believe that he was correct. And that the way out of that would be that we'd have to create our own values. We'd have to take the place of what was once, let's say, externalized and divine onto ourselves. And, you know, it's a hell of a theory. And it's not, and Nietzsche is not an easy person to criticize, because you have to do a lot of reading before you find someone who's 1/10 as smart as Nietzsche. He has this funny line about his books. It's really quite comical. He said, takes most writers a whole book to write what I can write in a sentence. Then he said, no, they can't even manage it in a book. And that's actually true. I mean, if you read Nietzsche, Beyond Good and Evil, for example, you see that his thought is so powerful that it's really a kind of miracle. What the psychoanalysts realized, though, this was particularly Jung's contribution, I would say, Carl Jung's contribution. He was a great student of Nietzsche, a real admirer of Nietzsche, and really someone who was trying to solve the problem that Nietzsche had put forward, which was, well, our underlying metaphysics, our religious structure had collapsed, and that was the story upon which our entire culture was based, for better or worse. It had collapsed. And we needed to do something about that, and we were doing various things. We were turning to fascism, let's say, or we were turning to communism, both ideological replacements for more fundamental religious beliefs. But that Nietzsche's suggestion that we turn to ourselves to extract out our own values to create our own values, let me be more accurate about that, happened to be untrue because we weren't the sort of creatures who were actually capable of doing that. And it's one of the reasons I love Jung and his biological take in some sense towards human beings, because Jung firmly believed, and I think all of the evidence supports him, believed that human beings actually had a nature, that we weren't merely social constructions, which we certainly aren't, despite what the social constructionists insist upon forcing us to think increasingly through legislative means, and that we had to wrestle with what it was that we were. Even though we're our own creatures in some sense, we also have to wrestle with our intrinsic nature. And we know about the nature part of that more and more. I mean, we know more about our neurocircuitry, for example. We know that there's a circuit for rage, and there's a circuit for fear, and there's a biological system for jealousy, and there's a system for altruism, and there's a circuit for play, and there's another one for pleasure, and there's a complex circuit for negative emotion, pain and anxiety and frustration and disappointment and guilt and shame. And we know that human beings share that motivational structure not only with all other human beings, but certainly with all mammals and almost all animals. And so that biological component of us is unbelievably deep, right? It's tens of millions, hundreds of millions, and even billions of years old. I read an interesting paper just the other day. I tend to talk about lobsters more than the average person, and one of the points I made in 12 Rules for Life was that our neurochemistry, at least some of it, is so similar. It's been conserved so completely throughout the immense duration of evolution, hundreds of millions of years, that lobsters, like human beings, appear to become the lobster equivalent of depressed if they suffer a hierarchy defeat, and that if you give them chemicals that are roughly analogous to human antidepressants, it perks them right back up, their posture improves, and they'll go off and fight. And when I first discovered that, it just blew me away. I never recovered from it. I thought, my God, really, that the continent is 350 million years of continuity in the structure of those systems. And we know the serotonin system, which is the system I'm talking about, does govern your observation of where you sit in a social hierarchy, like it does for many, many animal species, and as one consequence of that, regulates your emotions, so that if it sees that you're a relatively high status creature in your local environment, then it tends to allow you to feel more positive emotion and less negative emotion. And if it sees you as a low status creature in your local comparative environment, then it does the opposite. It overwhelms you with negative emotion and suppresses positive emotion. And so, and that's really bad. No one likes that. It's fundamentally, there's really nothing worse that can happen to you than that, to have those emotions adjusted in that manner, so that the incentive reward and the motivation and the positive emotion vanishes from your life. So there's nothing to be enthusiastic or excited about, and all of the negative emotions, pain, disappointment, frustration, grief, all of those terrible negative emotions are tremendously magnified. No one wants that. It's the last thing you want. Perhaps it's the last thing you want. And that's partly why people are very let's call it, what would you say, they're willing to fight for their position in their status hierarchy, and even for the existence of the hierarchies themselves. So anyways, it is the case that human beings have a nature, and we have to contend with that nature, and so we can't just create our own values. And what Jung, especially Jung, Freud started it, but especially Jung, believed that, well, in some sense, what had happened was that we had lost the externalized religious narrative that had been projected by our imagination out onto the world. You think about the constellations and the names of the constellations, and the idea that the skies were populated by gods. That was an externalization of our imagination, right? Projected out into the world. We were seeing the world through our imagination. and which is exactly how we do see the world. And as we proceed, we're better able to distinguish, let's say, what's imagination from what's objective world. But that doesn't mean the imagination disappears or that it's without value, because the imagination is part of what helps us, let's say, confront the future, because we do that with our imagination, and to compose things in possibility before we realize them in actuality. So for Jung, the world of gods just collapsed within, back into the imagination, and it was into the imagination that we had to go again to discover what we had lost, to discover these lost values. And that's akin, in some sense, I suppose, to rescuing your father from the belly of the whale. A very brilliant intellectual tour de force to manage that supposition, especially back when he did it. And I think I see no evidence whatsoever that he was wrong, given, as I said, our radical inability to command ourselves as if we are our own in some fundamental way. We seem subject to intractable moral laws. And I'm not trying to make a case for the accuracy of those laws necessarily, or for their metaphysical origin, but I am trying to make a case for their psychological and phenomenological reality. You definitely experience them insofar as you suffer, let's say, from the pricks and arrows of your own conscience. And I doubt if there's a single person in this room who doesn't regularly suffer in that manner, and some of you suffer like that virtually all the time, which can also be a problem. In any case, it's interesting to note that we're not exactly masters in our own houses, and that's such an interesting thing to note, because you think, well, if we're not masters in our own houses, well, what is it? Is it just a chaotic internal structure? Is it merely the voice of nature and nature's various instinctual subsystems? That doesn't seem to be correct, because we do integrate them into something approximating a unity. There's more than just the basics of nature. We have language, we have communication, we have culture. We build up above nature something that's more than nature, but we're still beholden to it. The question is, well, what are we beholden to? What is this that we're beholden to? And socially, politically, and individually, that we cannot escape from? Well, so that's part of the question. Do you believe in God? Well, that's part of the answer, actually. And, it's no bleak answer. But the first thing I'm trying to say is, try controlling yourself. Try acting as if you're the fundamental source of your own values, independent of any, what would you call it, transcendent ethical structure. Just see if you can do that. But try it for a week, try it for a month. I've never met anybody that could do it, not even for a moment.